You're listening to the A Minute to Midnight show. This is Tony, and this intro I'm recording retrospectively. You know, there are some guests that I really look forward to, and you wonder how it'll go. Will it live up to your expectations? Well, I have to say that today's guest is one of those that I really looked forward to having on, especially much, and this show really lived up to all my expectations. It's Norm Franz, and you really want to listen attentively to this because Norm has so much insight into what is going on in the global financial system, the Babylonian system of the world, and where it's all heading. We welcome Pastor Norm Franz to the A Minute to Midnight show. It's great to be speaking with you today, Norm. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while.
Well, thank you, Tony. I've been looking forward to it as well ever since Brooke talked to me and our mutual friend Michael told me what was going on. I just have really been looking forward to it.
Yes, well, Michael actually sent me your book late last year called Money and Wealth in the New Millennium, and I have to say it's possibly the best book I have ever read explaining the global financial system and how it's basically a Babylonian system that is based on what the Bible calls dishonest scales. And the book clearly shows that the way the whole financial system is structured goes against the biblical model for finances. So perhaps you could give our listeners a bit of a discourse in what that means, and give them a bit of a background actually first into you and your life and what you do.
Sure. Well, I will speak. I'll do that and tie it together with what you just your first question. For 16 years. I was in the business world, either as a small business owner, marketing management, financial management and planning, and business planning and development, and investment banking, and just on and on and on. And in 1987, and I was a believer. I had come to the Lord, but I was still walking in the ways of the world because that's all I knew was the ways of the world system. And in 87, when the stock market crashed, it pretty much wiped me out and a bunch of my clients. And I had no power to stop it. I never felt more powerless in my life. And I felt really bad. And I cried out to God. And I was, I've only been upset with God like twice in my life. And that was one of the times when I was upset with him, and I was, I wasn't rebuking, but I was upset, and I said, Lord, what's going on? How could you do this to all of these good people? And many of them were Christian believers, and to me, your servant, I'm just trying to help and do what I felt like you called me to do, and he just told me, he said, Norm, you've been doing it the world's way. And I said, well, why did this happen? He said, well, that's why they call it the world system. It's not my system. I didn't establish it. And that's when it's like, that's the only way I can explain it, Tony. It's like these scales fell off my eyes. And he just allowed me to see right into that financial system and see the falsehood and the fallacy behind what it was. And it's a blinding, deceiving thing that if people don't have that revelation, they don't allow the Lord to open up their eyes and show it to them. Because I was saying, well, show me, Lord, if this is a world system and I shouldn't be, promoting it, show me the world system aspect of it. And that's when he opened my eyes. And it just totally changed my whole approach to that. And that's the thing we have to understand, Tony, is that this system was not designed by the God of heaven and earth. Because if the financial system and the world system as a whole, political, financial, and so on, if that had been designed by God, especially in the financial realm, we wouldn't have the booms and the bust in the finances. We wouldn't be rich one moment and poor the next, because righteous wealth is an enduring wealth, is what Proverbs 8 talks about. It's an enduring wealth because it's based on righteousness and not unrighteousness. And that's when he showed me the dishonest weights and measures and how that all relates back to the monetary system, which I know we're going to get into here in a minute.
Yes. So the whole sort of system that we have now, it's not by accident that these things happen.
Yeah, I have Ascension Ministries. That's our ministry here in Colorado. Um, the Hebrew word or name for it is Sherut Aliyah. And we've come back to the Hebraic roots of Scripture. In other words, we study the Old Testament, the Law and the Prophets, the Torah, the teaching and instruction of God a lot because that's the foundation of what our faith is. Everything is found there. Everything in the New Covenant, apostolic writings of the New Testament are all based on that. And the Lord took me at that time when he showed me the fallacy in everything that this world system was built upon worldly principles. He took me directly to the passages of scriptures about dishonest weights and measures. And I had always, in dishonest scales, and I was always taught in the church that, well, that just meant, you can't have your thumbs on the scale and, you have to be honest in business. And there's there's truth to that, and that's all true. But the dishonest scales and the dishonest weights, those are two terms for the same thing, is about in ancient times they would have scales where they would weigh out like the food. They put the food on one side, and then they would actually use the precious metal in the coins to weigh out whatever they were buying. In other words, they would put the actual coin like a shekel with so many grams of silver, and they would put that up on there, and then when it balanced out, that's how much you would buy. That would be the price. And for example, what they used to do in order to debauch the currency, in Amos chapter 8 it talks about this, is that they would dilute it with dross metal. And the dross metal was always lighter than the precious metal, the silver or especially the gold. And in other words, they would debauch the currency using a dross metal. In ancient times, that in fact that was one of the reasons why judgment came upon Israel, and Amos chapter 8 is very, very clear about that, talking about how they're saying, when will the new moon be over so that we can open the wheat markets and buy grain and so on and so forth, and cheat with dishonest scales. And you have to understand that most everything, everything in the futures and options of, all the grains and stuff like that is based and built on, bought and sold on margin using debt. Because today, the way that money and investments as well, like in the stock market, the way that they debauch those elements of our financial system, especially the currency, they don't use dross metal, they use debt to debauch the currency. So we went from, in the United States, for example, well, in every country, in the world, has gone over a period, different process and time, have gone from where gold and silver, which is the only biblical money that is described in the scriptures. In fact, the Hebrew word for money is kasef, and it's translated silver. And that is the only biblically ordained monetary system, is that of the precious metals, gold and silver. And we've gone from that in every country, and now all of our money is built upon debt. And I show that specifically. In fact, I'm going to be doing that this Saturday in our live. We do a live webcast here. That's what we are. We are an internet church, and we do a live webcast, and we just share all this stuff. This is our main focus, but we don't do it in in a doom and gloom way. We do it in, this is what's coming. Get ready for it because you're not going to stop it. And then we encourage people. Okay, this is what we need to do because as the world gets worse, God's people are going to be walking closer and stronger and more prosperous even in Him. And so this Saturday, I'm going to be sharing why this system is scheduled to fail, no matter who is president. And I know we'll get into that later, but this system is going to fail. And the reason it's going to fail is because it's built upon a lie called dishonest weights and measures in the monetary system. All money everywhere in the world has been created as a loan in a bank. And then when that loan was deposited into the borrower's account, the debt of that loan became money. Therefore, all money is debt. And what's the biggest problem we have in the world today in the financial system? It's debt. And the only thing that they can do to fix it is to roll the debt over by bailing out and throwing more debt on it, which doesn't fix anything. It just extends the debt cliff that this entire world system is going over.
Now, it's interesting. My whole drive towards this A Minute to Midnight thing originally came from God sort of speaking to me about silver and that is the true money. And then when I read, or silver and gold, but when I read in your book what you'd said about the Hebrew word for money being translated silver, it was like a big light went on in my head there. That was like late last year, or probably October last year or something, and it was like, my goodness, wow. So the whole debt thing is huge, but it hasn't happened by accident. It's, this has been planned so that they can collapse the current financial system. That's the other thing you show in the book, that right from the word go, the system that we have now was designed to be able to be collapsed so that they can bring in eventually their one world monetary system. Is that right?
Well, absolutely. And the thing we have to understand, and I try to help people, is that because chapters 4 and 5, I talk about the conspiracy. I talk about a global conspiracy. I'm very clear that has been in the earth since the beginning, and that it is manifesting now in a big way. And I lay out all the scriptures that just categorically say that this is a conspiracy, and that conspiracy, it continues in the earth. And just one example is Psalms 37:12 says, "The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him." That is just something that is in the earth, and the wicked, it's a plan, and the wicked are just heck bent on destroying anything that's righteous, anything that is God, because they don't care about people. In fact, the more people they can destroy in that process, the more that the satanic realm of the creation loves it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and so and so on something like this, Tony, and this is the thing that I try to help everybody understand, is that once a system like that is set up and then it feeds into the entire world, you don't have to do anything to collapse the system, because it is a self-consuming system that eventually, if just left by itself and people function in it, will collapse the system. And what happens is when you have these blowouts like we did in '87, that's the first time that we saw the derivatives, which is just a highly, I'm sure your audience has heard about those. It's a highly leveraged investment that's based on equations that are plugged into a computer. There's like, and they use the other investment computer entries, for lack of a better term, to leverage and try to make money on it. And they called him in the early days, they called him a portfolio insurance. But it was in '87. That's what the Lord showed me was the crux of the whole deal, was the use of those derivatives and how the market moved against them, and and they collapsed, and then it was just a domino effect. And the bottom line is that system left to itself, it's a self-fulfilling system, in that it's going to collapse no matter what. And the powers that be that are there, whether they understand the conspiracy and are part of it, or whether they don't, they're just caught up in that spirit of it. They're going to try and save it, and they don't realize that in their trying to save it, they only postpone it because they actually make it worse. And as far as Donald Trump goes, because I know a lot of people out there are wondering, is Donald Trump going to save it and turn it all around? And the answer is, Donald Trump, if he implements some of the things that he wants to do, he could slow it down, but he's not going to stop it. This thing is coming, and I'm telling the people in the name of the Lord, it's a thus says the Lord, it's coming, and get yourself ready in spirit, soul, and body, because nobody, not even Donald Trump, is going to stop it.
The thing is, could he actually accelerate it rather than slow it down as well? And potentially conflict even between the USA and China over his policies to bring jobs back to America and possibly debasing the American currency somewhat. So you end up with a currency war. Then could it even result in actual war?
Well, the war aspect of it, it's like I heard in one of your interviews with somebody, um, your take on Donald Trump, that he could actually make it worse. And I thought, man, Tony's really on the ball, because, brother, I believe you're absolutely right. Here's the way that I see it, and I've been sharing this. In fact, I shared some of it last week in our Shabbat service, and you can go to our website at ascensionministries.net, and just click on the live broadcast. And if you go there, we have a YouTube channel that you can click, and we have an archive there of what we've taught. And and I tell you, I'm listening to you and I'm going, hallelujah, this guy's all right. I haven't met too many guys like that. They can see that far into this thing. But that Donald Trump, we have to understand, Donald Trump is he says that he's an anti-globalist. Well, he's an anti-New World Order globalist. But Donald Trump is a globalist. He's just an international globalist. In other words, the New World Order globalism is the whole New Age, very satanic, inspired conspiracy to take over the world, tear down borders, and bring the world into one, under the auspices of one world ruler that we know as, in the scriptures, we know as the Antichrist. And 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 he's against that because countries lose their sovereignty. He is still a globalist. He just believes that countries need to come together in a global order. It's just that they maintain their own sovereignty versus becoming all one great big people. That's pretty much the only difference. Plus, he has conservative more, and the conservative aspect of things is definitely more biblical than the liberal left. And Scripture is very clear about that. Ecclesiastes 10:2 says that a wise man's heart leads him to the right, but a fool's heart leads him to the left. That's God's position on two-party politics. God, and I wrote an article in our newsletter several months ago that about kingdom politics, liberal or conservative, and from a biblical standpoint, God's kingdom is more conservatively minded than the left, obviously. But I always tell people that doesn't mean that Jesus is a Republican. And it doesn't mean that GOP stands for God's own party, because political conservatism and biblical conservatism are more closely associated than the left or liberalism, but biblical conservatism and political conservatism, it's much more balanced and fair, but it's also much more conservative. Biblical conservatism is. If you want to see what biblical conservatism is, and you won't see it until Yeshua comes, but that's Jesus. When Jesus comes, that's when you'll see true biblical conservatism, and it works if we just would, it would work today if we would follow it. Except if we did that, there would be no reason for Jesus to return.
We have many evangelical Christians claiming that Donald Trump is God's man who will turn the US economy around and bring prosperity back to America. So my question is, if the whole financial system is built on flawed anti-biblical principles, why would God endorse a man who's going to use those same principles to attempt to make a nation greater than ever? Or is this actually underneath it all? Is there a plan to actually collapse the global economy in order to bring about the new financial system, and possibly Donald Trump being the catalyst for that?
Well, that was what I was referring to earlier when I heard you say that, because that's exactly what's going on. And here's how I believe it's gonna unfold. First of all, this thing is unfolding exactly like the globalists want. Back in 2009, when the Tea Party here in the United States rose up and really had an impact on the liberal left and slowed things down and so on and so forth, but it created a bigger rift between the left and the right, even more so, with this whole move to come. It's an anti-globalist, anti-establishment move that actually started in the Arab Spring in Egypt. The original Occupy movement started in the public square right there in Cairo, where they took over the square and they overthrew the Mubarak government. That was called the Occupy movement, and that had spread, and that spread like wildfire across the Middle East. It went into Europe, because Europe was having all the financial issues and the banks on the verge of defaulting, and sovereign governments like Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal and Ireland and so on and so forth. They were all on the verge of collapse, and part of the bailout for them was the austerity measures, where they cut back on social programs, and people revolted against that. And then in Britain, in England, the people were sick and tired of bureaucrats at Brussels, at the head of the European Union, telling them what type of water hot pot they could use to make water for their tea. You don't tell Brits you don't mess with the Brits' tea. And they finally told the EU, which is part of the globalist agenda. They finally told the EU, enough's enough. We want our sovereignty back. And you had Nigel come in, and he brought in Brexit, which Britain exited out of the whole EU thing. And they're talking right now about putting that referendum up again to the people. And you might have some real serious civil uprising if they do that in Britain. And that's just coming out. You'll be hearing about that here in the next day or two. And then that same anti-establishment spirit came to America. And that's why Donald Trump won the election, because that was a populist anti-establishment movement. But we must understand, look at the hatred, and you're down in New Zealand, but when you're here in the States, if the left has such a hatred for Donald Trump, and they're violent, they physically accost people, that is a prelude to civil war, where the people are actually physically fighting each other. And I told people in 2009, when I saw the Tea Party, and everybody's, oh, they're so happy about the Tea Party and we're going to get back our country. And I just said, don't get sucked into it. I said, remember, the Revolutionary War started with a Tea Party. And that Tea Party was put on by a group of Freemasons on break from a Masonic Lodge meeting. And so don't get caught up into that, because it's all part of the plan to create such havoc and such chaos on a not only on a national level but on an international level, that the whole system goes over the edge, and out of that will come the New World Order. And that's exactly what's happening. This is only going to get worse, and it's only going to, and as we do, and as the debt bubbles begin to pop in these different countries, and it dominoes throughout the world, this thing is going to go over the edge with wars and rumors of wars and financial crisis and so on and so forth. And we have to understand that that's coming, and you're not going to stop it. It's all part of the plan. So I commend you, Tony, on your insight on that, because you're absolutely right. Do I believe that Donald Trump is part of that conspiracy? No, I don't. I don't believe Donald Trump understands. He doesn't understand that the financial system that he's trying to save, because I really believe he thinks he can save it. He doesn't understand that he can't save it. Nobody can, because it's built upon the dishonest weights and measures. I'm hoping my book or one of my DVDs gets into his hands sometime.
Yes, yeah. Actually, speaking about the book, the book we're talking about is called Money and Wealth in the New Millennium. I just want to read a couple of bits out of chapter 5, where just some quotes from Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati in 1776. And it's great to have all these quotes in one place. So here's Weishaupt. It is necessary to establish a universal regime and empire over the whole world. The expressed aim of this order was to abolish Christianity and overthrow all civil government. And then on page 48, the pupils, members of the Illuminati, are convinced that the order will rule the world. Every member, therefore, becomes a ruler. We all think of ourselves as qualified to rule. It is therefore an alluring thought both to good and bad men. By this lure, the order will spread. And here's the real clincher one. Secrecy gives greater zest to the whole. The slightest observations show that nothing will so much continue to increase the zeal of the members as secret union. The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. And to me, that's the clincher, see? There's a secret plan going on here, and they're playing this plan out, and people do not realize what's going on because it's so cleverly disguised.
Well, and just to add to that, Tony, one of the insiders himself, an academic insider, on the next page, 51, Carol Quigley, he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, he said this: there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way that the radical right believes the Communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as round table groups, that's like your Trilateral Commission and your Council on Foreign Relations and Bilderbergs and so on, he says, they have no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 90s to examine its papers and its secret records. And then he goes on to say that I've disagreed with some of their policies, but for the most for the most part, I primarily disagree with the fact that they want to keep it secret, but I think it's too important not to let everybody else know. In other words, Quigley was saying it's the only answer for the world, and he disagreed with they want to keep it secret. He thought it needed to be out there and just let everybody know. And the bottom line is that not everybody would accept it now. And I don't know if Quigley realized that or not. I mean, he had to realize that. But not even now would everybody accept it. You have to have a sufficient financial, political, and I believe even mixed with war in there, crises that would cause the whole world to say, okay, we need to come back and we need to come together as one, because that's the only way it's going to work. And that's what the goal is, and that's why the crisis is coming. Regardless, it is coming, and the scriptures, the Bible, declares that that's going to come. This is not the Great Tribulation. This is the great end time shaking that leads to the Great Tribulation. That's what we're in right now.
So do we see the Hegelian dialectic in play here? So they're pitting the left against the right, so you have the two extremes, and that's where all the civil unrest is coming from, and eventually they want to bring their synthesis, which will be the solution, the one world government and one despotic leader.
Yes, well, and something that happened this year in America anyway, and it happened in England as well in Brexit. But not only do you have the left against the right, but within both camps, you have two different camps now within both of those camps fighting each other within the Republican Party and within the liberal parties. And so those things are creating even more havoc and more crises from within. And in the end, they're going to throw both parties off and opt for the global option, and everybody's going to have to go with it. Or they're going to think that they have to go with it, and that's when we'll go over the edge. That's the modus operandi, the MO. That's chapter 6 in the book. I just talk about that. In fact, the lead scripture in that is Psalms 36, 1 and 4. It says, transgression speaks to the ungodly within his heart. The words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit. He plans wickedness upon his bed. He sets himself on a path that is not good. He does not despise evil. And that's one thing that helps us to understand the evil that men do. It's because they have an evil heart to overthrow righteousness in any form. And that's why it's called the world system. It is built upon the principles of the God of this world. That's why it's called the world system, and it's perpetuated by the spirit of this world. But see, we're not of the spirit of this world, but we are of the Spirit of God. And that's why we have to hear the voice of Messiah in the book of Revelation that says to his people, come out of her, my people, come out of Babylon, so that you don't participate in her sins or receive of her plagues. And that doesn't mean we go to the mountains and find a cave and move in and eat beans together. That's not what I'm talking about. I always tell my congregation here, I'm not going to move to the mountains. I moved to the mountains. I'm in the mountains, but we don't live in a cave, and I'm not going to eat beans with them, But the bottom line is that people need to prepare spirit, soul, and body, and that's what we're about here. And it's about coming back and doing it God's way in the world system, so that we're in the world, but we're not of the world. Because when we do it the world's way, then we're of that world system, and we're subject to the curses that are coming upon it. Even though we're believers, it's not a salvation issue. It's a blessing or a cursing issue, and that's going to be paramount in the days ahead.
So practically, how do believers get out of that system? How do they prepare? What sort of advice can you give people at this point?
Well, I tell you, brother, the way that the Lord has worked in my life, and I mean, it's just been an awesome experience. I can't even, it's hard to put into words. Is I've come back and I've studied and I've embraced the commandments of God. Um, and what we call the Torah. The Torah is just a Hebrew word, and it's translated law, but it means so much more than that. It means teaching and instruction. The foundation, the root word of Torah is Yara, and it means to water. And it's like, and to shoot an arrow, so that to hit the mark, and so on and so forth. And within the commandments of God in the Old Testament are all the instruction that God gives us for how to live, life, from our monetary system, managing the monetary system, to taking care of the poor. I mean, just everything, to liability laws, which are written in your constitution, and your legal ordinances, and in your courts down there, are all based on God's law. To quarantine is laid out in the scriptures. Before we knew what, spreading disease was all about, God gave us quarantine laws that are still in play today. And the CDC and all these different hospitals, they used quarantine, and it's right out of the scriptures. And we've lost the understanding of that, and we've gone off in all of this stuff that is so, you and I, we understand just basic righteous principles. I mean, just kind, and some of it's just common sense. But when you see some of these politicians do and promote such stupid policies, we sit here, little kids will sit and say, "Mom and Dad, why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense." It's because they're of this world, and they're influenced by that world system. And we've got to come back to, we can't understand how to come out of the world system if we don't know what God's system is supposed to look like. Because that's what I did. I mean, I was trying to, and even after the Lord began showing me all of this, and I came out, and I said, "Okay, Lord, I'm ready to go." I thought I knew what He had for me, and what He wanted me to do. And I started a new company, and I know that He told me to do it, and I battled with it, and worked with it, and strived and labored for 2 years, and then it failed. And I went to the Lord, and I said, What is going on, Lord? I know you told me to start the company. You gave me the name of the company, and so on and so forth. And it's like He just put it in my heart, and He said, "Yeah, that's right, I did. But then you went out and just did it the way that you were used to doing it, that you knew how to do it from before. You didn't come back and ask me to show you how to do it." And the way that He had me do it, after that, it was totally different, and everything worked just fine.
So practically then, for people that are, living the way they are, with most people are in debt and
Hmm.
living a debt-filled life, and no thought to that system collapsing, what can they do in a practical sense at this time?
Well, the first thing, Tony, I always tell people, the first thing is to get out of debt. That is the prime requisite, because debt is going to be the millstone around people's necks when this thing goes over the edge. And that's one thing I find really distressing, brother, is because I know people that had read my book, they got the revelation, they understood it, they came out of debt, and so on and so forth. I even had people call and write, email, and so on and so forth, say thank you for the book. It saved me financially in the 2007, 2008 financial crises that hit the world. And it wasn't just here in the States, it was in other countries that had my book, because they did what they took the principles and applied them in their own finances, and they said thank you. Some of them sent tithe money off their profits. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, it was an awesome thing. But some of those people, unfortunately, have more or less forgotten about the things that they learned, and they've gone back in, and they're now using debt to try and make money. And the scripture is very, very, very clear about not borrowing money to make money. And that's what this whole world system is about. So it's not just about getting out of debt personally. It's about being very, very careful not to use leverage investments where you're putting like a down payment on the purchase of stock or something, and then borrowing the balance to buy that stock. And people would go out and they would borrow money, buy a house. The equity, the prices went up and they had equity, so they pulled that equity out in money, and they bought cars, and they bought boats, and they bought all this stuff. And then the financial, the whole real estate market, in fact, it was the financial system that supported the real estate market that collapsed. It was a financial system and the easy money and all that money that went into real estate that drove prices artificially high, but it wasn't real wealth. It was an artificial wealth that was built on debt. So when the financial system and the ability to borrow and buy real estate collapsed, prices collapsed. And they ended up having to sell their houses in short sales, and they ended up $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 upside down. And the real problem was that they owed taxes on that money because it was considered income. And they were basically in a modern day debtor's prison. And that, when the whole world system collapses, governments, sovereign governments, are going to be in that situation, and that's when everybody will be forced to roll it over into a one world, new world order that's not run by God, but the anti-God of this world.
What do you see the role of precious metals in the coming next period of time?
Yeah, very good question, because when you're looking at money, Ecclesiastes says that money is the answer to all things. But then the New Testament says that the love of money is the root of all evil. So there's nothing wrong with money. It's just the love of money. And the bottom line is that because paper assets, beginning with our currencies, what we get for our paycheck when we take it home and put it in the bank, it's all based on debt, and it's easily manipulated up and down. In fact, probably the best example was in the financial crisis over in Southeast Asia. And you guys are a lot closer to that than I was, but there was a de facto devaluation of the Thailand baht when George Soros and some of the other big money currency traders sold that off and took their profits. There was a collapse of currency all throughout the whole Southeast Asia. And the bottom line was that when you looked at the price of gold, for example, in U.S. dollars, which was stable, and then gold didn't go anywhere price wise. But when you looked at the price of gold in, let's say, the Malaysian ringgit, which I have a graph of that in my book, it shows how the value of the ringgit came down, just dropped like a rock, but the price of gold in ringgits went up. And it was a direct correlation between the drop in the paper value of the paper currency, the purchasing power, and the value, I should say, the price of the gold. And prices went up in everything, clothes and so on and so forth. And it wasn't because the prices went up, it's because the value of the paper went down, so that it took more paper to buy goods and services and so on and so forth. So the role that I see with precious metals, and this is my primary advice for people when you're going into it: don't buy precious metals to try and make money. You can make money in it if you know how to buy and sell and so on and so forth. And there's really nothing wrong with that, as long as you realize there is still risk in that. But from a preserving your wealth outside of the collapsing debt-based paper system, the only monetary asset that's not somebody else's debt is the precious metals. And when the paper collapses, the only thing that'll maintain its purchasing power as what we would call money, because it is a monetary asset, both gold and silver, is the gold and silver. They maintain their purchasing power. They buy pretty much the same of what they bought back in the early 1900s. You know, a $20 gold piece used to buy a good suit in those days, and a $20 gold piece will still buy a good suit. And so, you know, and people say $1,000, $1,200, $1,300 for a suit. And I say, yeah, I mean that's a good suit. And if you don't believe me, give me a gold coin, and I'll show you how it's done.
I've seen stories in Venezuela where apparently an ounce of silver will buy several months' worth of food at the moment. So,
Well,
if the collapse begins to happen globally, well, could that become the global?
I don't think it'll become an official global currency. Here's how the collapse will happen, as far as, because that's a question I get a lot from people, and and the only reason I know how this works is because I understand the system. I was a monetary economist, and if you understand how the system works, you know, a lot of things that these guys are prophesying out there about, you know, the financial system and the end of money, and so on and so forth. And I sit here and I listen to them, and they say, oh, the Lord told me this and the Lord told me that, and they've written books about it. And I'm just sitting here thinking, it just doesn't work that way. It's not going to happen. That is, you're speaking out of your doctrine, which is just ignorant of how the world system works. And so here's how it'll work, Tony. This is how the world system works, is that as long as the system is up, where you can go to the bank, you can use your debit card, you can pull money out of the bank, you can, you know, write a check and have it clear the bank where they pay the company you wrote the check to, and so on and so forth. As long as that system is up, your currency, your official legal tender, will be the money in your country. It'll be the U.S. dollar, or the New Zealand. It's a dollar down there. Is
Yep,
that what they
yep,
call it?
yep.
Yeah, it's a New Zealand dollar, the Australian dollar, you know, and the Malaysian ringgit. All of those currencies will still be in use. It's just that if there's a devaluation of them, they won't buy as much goods and services. So you'll have to, your $100,000 in the bank today will only buy, let's say, $50,000 worth of goods and services tomorrow. Okay, that's how you lose wealth. Even if you have precious metals and you want to buy food or you want to buy whatever, then you can exchange those precious metals for more of the currency, because the currency's been devalued and the price of the precious metals would go up, and you'll be able to go buy whatever goods and services that also cost more. So what it does is the gold and the silver maintains your purchasing power. If the system goes down, where you can't get into your bank and get your money out, and I believe there's coming a point in time where that will happen, it will probably, on a global scale, and it depends on the various countries, and maybe even from a regional standpoint, it may only last for a short period of time until they can get get the banks back up and going, and so on. The precious metals will be the currency on the street. It'll be the money of the day. People will be trading with each other, and so on and so forth, using gold, silver, and so on and so forth. It'll more or less be like a barter system. Um, and that's how it's going to work. And people say, well, how will you know what it's worth? It's called spontaneous order. It's whatever the market bears at that point in time. I had a client one time, a woman. I don't, you know, if you remember back in the mid '90s when Russia introduced the new ruble. She told me that she had been invited to go to Russia and that she was going over there on a missions trip, and she said, you know, what do I do financially? And I said, well, whatever you do, you know, take some silver with you. And so she took a tube of silver, 20 silver eagles. They cost her about $5 at that time. she got over there, and sure enough, right in the middle of her trip, they canceled the old ruble, which she had, she exchanged and got at the airport, and they introduced the new ruble. And at the church she went to, they had, when they took the offering, they had two offering buckets, one for the old ruble and one for the new ruble. And she went down to the marketplace, and in the midst of all of that, and she pulled out one of those silver eagles that was she bought for like $5. And she said, Norm, I had the purchasing power, depending on who I was dealing with, anywhere from $17 to $35 on the street. And she told me, she said, I've heard what you said, and I've always trusted what you said, even though I didn't understand it fully. But then she said, now I understand, because women understand purchasing power. Make no mistake about it. And so she was sold, and that is something that once you experience it, you know it to be true, because a man with an experience is no, I should say, a man with an argument's no man match for a man with an experience.
Very interesting. One last question then. Is there a possibility, do you think, when they do, well, will they print a whole heap of money before the system collapses, and then when they do bring in the new system, are they likely to back currencies with gold?
No, no, because for a couple of reasons. One, about 3-4 years ago, during the Humphrey Hawkins um, testimony, when Bernanke was still the Fed chairman. Ron Paul, if you guys remember Ron Paul, he has always been anti-Federal Reserve and anti, fiat currency and stuff like that. He was just drilling Bernanke, and he asked him the question: do you believe so does the Federal Reserve consider gold to be money? And Bernanke hemmed and hawed, and he talked around it. And Paul said, "You didn't answer my question, Mr. Chairman." And he said, "Do you believe that do you see gold? Is gold money?" And Bernanke said the only thing that he could say, and that was, "No, it's not." And Ron Paul said, "Well, then why does the Federal Reserve have so much of it on deposit in its balance sheet?" And Bernanke said, "Tradition." And I've never really, I mean, I've heard officials lie, because I know when it comes to stuff like that, I know when they're telling the truth and they're not, because I understand the system. But I've never heard anybody tell a lie that big in front of everybody. And the only one that I believe really understood it was Ron Paul, because that was a lie. Because the bottom line is, the international bankers know that whoever owns the gold controls what's going on. And so no, I don't believe it. Plus, with all the money that's out there, the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of money, if all of a sudden that was going to be, quote, backed by gold, it would make gold, gold would be worth $1 bazillion an ounce, because there's nowhere near the amount of gold. The gold market is so small in comparison to just the currency market, not to mention the investment market. They'll never back it with gold. In the book, I talk about how they're going to back it with the world itself as the foundation of all the value of the World Bank is going to be the natural resources of the earth. And one proposal that's out there, and I put it in the book, proposes that everybody, and it lists the people of the world as capital, working capital, and it values each person at $100,000 apiece. And that is because, see, the borrower becomes a slave to the lender, and the nations, through their governments, we must understand, have become servants to the international banking cartel, which ultimately anti-Messiah will step forward and take control of. And that's how he's going to rule. And that's how he's going to get everybody to take the mark of the beast, because you won't be able to buy or sell without that mark, to use his closed cashless system to run the world financially. And I talked about that last week, that was coming, and how there's a war on cash right now, and they are moving gangbusters to get to a place where we have a closed cashless system for a whole host of reasons that I know we don't have time for right now.
Well, yeah, that's been amazing. We'll have to come back sometime soon and carry on, because you're right. There's so much more we could discuss, and I'm really aware of the fact that time has run out. So yeah, I'd love to carry on this conversation again sometime.
Well, I'm pretty much for ministries like yours, Tony. I appreciate you so much and your insight, and I just want to tell you, brother, I think you're right on. And when I run into a ministry like that, I'm pretty much open. I'll make the time.
That'd be great. So once again, before we close, can you just give our listeners your website?
The website is ascensionministries.net, and Ascension is ASCENSION ministries.net.
Well, thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion, and time's gone so fast. So thank you for being on the A Minute to Midnight show today, Norm.
God bless you, Tony, and thanks for having me on. We'll talk to you later.
Well, we'll certainly be wanting to get Norm back very soon. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that interview. And remember, you can find all of our interviews at this YouTube channel, which you may want to subscribe to, and also all our shows and articles you can find on the aminutetomidnight.com website. You can also find audio-only versions of our shows on iTunes. A Minute to Midnight is run on donations, and we have a donation button on our website, and a big thank you to those people that do support us and help us that way. And also, I write, play and record all the music that we use in our shows, and you can find my royalty-free music and sound effects packs at rockshoresounds.com, and there's a link to that on the Minute to Midnight website. Well, that's about it for this show. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us in the next show.